following program is rated TV MALV. It contains strong language and violence. It is intended only for mature audiences.
Police continued searching Big Bear Saturday for a third day in the manhunt for Christopher Dorner. Dorner is wanted for ambushing a Riverside police officer and killing an Irvine couple.
Searching for Christopher Dorner. This is the cop who's gone on a shooting rampage, allegedly. Let's listen in.
He is safe. We're going to continue searching until either we discover that he left the mountain or we find him, one of the two.
A revenge-motivated shooting rampage, but this is no ordinary manhunt. The man they're looking for was once a cop himself, armed, dangerous, and equipped with the same training as those tracking him.
Down between police and Christopher Dorner. Listen to the bullets. An unbelievable number of the bullets exchanged between the suspect and police surrounding the cabin. Smoke bombs fired.
By 2 p.m., smoke is pouring out of the building, then flames. Shortly before 5, reports of a SWAT team approaching the fire in an armored vehicle and injecting gas into the cabin before reportedly peeling back the walls of that cabin like an onion.
Armed and dangerous are on every freeway here in Southern California, police hoping that someone will spot him. So far, no one has. The last tangible clue where Dorner might be, the burnt-out hulk of his truck near Big Bear Lake.
From Christopher Jordan Dorner to America. Subject: Last resort. I know most of you who personally know me are in disbelief to hear from the media reports that I am suspected of committing such horrendous murders and have taken drastic and shocking actions in the last couple of days. You are saying to yourself that this is completely out of character of the man you knew, who always wore a smile whenever he was seen. I know I will be vilified by the LAPD and the media. Unfortunately, this is a necessary evil that I do not enjoy, but must partake and complete for substantial change to occur within the LAPD and reclaim my name. The department has not changed since the Rampart and Rodney King days. It has gotten worse. The consent decree should have never been lifted. The only thing that has evolved from the consent decree is that officers involved in the Rampart scandal and Rodney King incidents have since been promoted to supervisors, commanders, and command staff and executive positions within the LAPD. The real question is, what would you do to clear your name? On the afternoon of February 12, 2013, in a small, sleepy mountain town on the outskirts of Los Angeles, in San Bernardino County, a former esteemed United States Naval Lieutenant and LAPD officer, Christopher Dorner, found himself barricaded inside an empty cabin in Big Bear, California, waging a war against the LAPD and all law enforcement of the surrounding region. What seemed to be a normal winter afternoon in the small mountain town would soon play out in a shootout and standoff that even Hollywood productions would struggle to replicate. For weeks, the FBI and every federal and local law enforcement agency in the country were hunting one man, making him the most wanted and most dangerous person in the nation. Their fear and anger justified, for in turn, this highly trained and armed figure had been hunting them. A tale of tragedy, revenge, and destruction. A story that touches upon all instincts and emotions of man. Mahatma Gandhi famously quoted that an eye for an eye will only make the whole world blind. But today we will learn of the repercussions of a man who couldn't see past the wrong he had believed done to him, who wouldn't look away, and who vowed vengeance against those he had believed had wronged him, and unfortunately was blinded by the rage and hatred that burned within him. Christopher Jordan Dorner was born on June 4th, 1979, and grew up in Southern California. He had multiple residences throughout his life, but in his childhood, it's noted that his family had lived in Norwalk, California for a period of time, eventually moving to Cypress, California, in Orange County, where he would attend Cypress High School and eventually graduate in 1997. Chris was a well-liked and extremely well-mannered, respectful student from all accounts of his peers and teachers, and even neighbors described Dorner as belonging to an admired, well-liked family, and he was a man who usually kept to himself, but friendly when talked to. After graduating from high school, he later went on to attend and graduate from Southern Utah University in 2001 with a major in political science and a minor in psychology. While attending the university, he was a running back on the school's football team for the 1999 and 2000 season. After graduating from university, Dorner would move on and decide to join the Navy in 2002. He was a United States Navy Reserve officer, and from all accounts from fellow naval officers, Dorner was an exemplary cadet. A notable event took place as a student in his undergraduate pilot training at Vance Air Force Base in Enid, Oklahoma. Dorner and a classmate of his had found a bag containing nearly $8,000 that had belonged to the nearby Ended Korean Church of Grace. The two, without debate or second thought, handed over the money to the police. When police questioned and asked him of their motive for returning such a large sum, Dorner replied, and I quote, "The military stresses integrity. There was a couple of $1,000s there, and if people are willing to give that to a church, it must be pretty important to them." End
Maggie,
quote.
I spoke to a church elder here at the Korean Church of Grace. He tells me that he remembers a very different Christopher Dorner and that he was shocked to hear news of this national manhunt. In fact, 11 years ago, Dorner was hailed for being an honest man here in Enid. Byung-moon Chang says he was taking church donations from Sunday's collection to the bank when he realized he had left the money bag on top of his car and driven off. Dorner and a fellow service member found that bag and turned it into police. Chang says he was so happy to hear that the money wasn't lost.
It's God's money. So even if that amount wasn't $7,000, but $700 and wasn't used properly, then that would have been very unfortunate.
And had that money been lost for good, Chang says it would have been tough on the church's budget. Now, coming up at 6, we will have much more reaction from church members and dig deeper into why they say this seems so out of Dorner's character. We're live in Enid tonight. Patty Moon.
Dorner also stated that his mother had taught him the importance of honesty and integrity. And after moving past his training program, as time went on, he would eventually be responsible for command of a security unit at Naval Air Station Fallon in Nevada, and would serve with the Mobile Inshore Undersea Warfare Unit from June 2004 to February of 2006. While with the Naval Reserve, Dorner would eventually be deployed to Bahrain on active duty from November 2006 to April 2007. Throughout his time in the Navy, Dorner received such accolades as the Navy Rifle Marksmanship Ribbon and a Naval Pistol Shot Ribbon with Expert Device. Dorner had always had interest in law enforcement. When he was a teenager, he decided that he'd like to pursue a career in the police force and joined a youth program offered by the police department in the city of La Palma. And after college, during his time serving as a naval reservist, Dorner decided to also join the Los Angeles Police Department, or the LAPD. He entered the police academy in 2005 and graduated in 2006. Shortly after graduating from the academy, his duties as a probationary officer were put on hold when he and his unit would be deployed by the Navy to Bahrain for a year. Upon his return from duty overseas in July of 2007, Officer Dorner would be paired with Training Officer Teresa Evans to complete what was left of his probationary training with the LAPD Harbor Division. This is where things in the story of Christopher Dorner would come to an head. An incident involving Training Officer Evans would be the main catalyst for a chain of events that would go down in infamy and would rock law enforcement and the public nationwide, and would be remembered as one of the largest and most notorious manhunts that have ever taken place in American history. On July 28th of 2007, Dorner and Officer Evans responded to the DoubleTree Hotel in San Pedro, California. The call was regarding a disturbance being caused by a man named Christopher Gettler. Gettler, who had been clinically diagnosed with schizophrenia and also suffered with bouts of severe dementia. Upon arrival at the scene, all exact details of the interaction or what was said between the officers and Mr. Gettler are unclear. But once Gettler was apprehended, Dorner alleges that Officer Teresa Evans twice kicked Gettler in the chest and once in the face while he was already handcuffed and lying on the ground. Gettler's father would later testify that his son told him that he had been kicked by a police officer. Dorner in his manifesto stated the kick to Mr. Gettler's face left a visible injury on his left cheek below the eye, and after filing a report of the incident after the altercation and reporting of Training Officer Evans' actions towards Mr. Gettler, instead of the officer being reprimanded or suspended for excessive force, attention would instead fall on the credibility of Dorner, with him writing, and I quote, "Unfortunately, after reporting it to supervisors and investigated by PSB Internal Affairs investigator, nothing was done. I had broken their supposed blue line." End quote. Questions of Dorner's true motives came up considering Dorner had filed the incident report the day after being told by Training Officer Evans that her evaluation of him had said that Dorner needed to improve his performance to be a LAPD officer.
Okay, and do you remember where you were kicked in the face?
Right here.
Do you remember who kicked you in the face?
An officer.
Do you remember what sex? Was it a male or female?
It was a female.
And do you remember whether they were white or black?
They were black, or almost black, I think. And I was almost white.
Do you remember whether the female had light color hair or dark hair?
She had darker hair. Her hair was a lighter shade. Darker.
Okay, but do you remember being kicked?
Yeah.
Okay, and how many times?
Once.
Okay, and where?
This side, I think. Yeah, this side.
Okay, excellent.
Training Officer Evans' evaluation report implied that Dorner did not meet the standards of the LAPD, but how could a man of such high regard and an esteemed naval lieutenant not meet the requirements and qualifications for law enforcement? This is the main catalyst, or what some would say was the first domino to fall in a tragic series of events. After the incident, Dorner, to his belief, thought the altercation at the DoubleTree Hotel with Training Officer Evans was behind him, but little did he know it was just the beginning. He writes, and I quote, "In fact, 10 months later, on June 25th of 2008, after already successfully completing my probation and acquiring a basic post certificate and intermediate post certificate, I was relieved of my duty by the LAPD while assigned to patrol at Southwest Division. It is clear as day that the department had retaliated towards me for reporting Officer Evans for kicking Mr. Gettler. The department stated that I had lied and made up the report. I later went to a Board of Rights Department hearing for my decision of continued employment, and during the BOR hearing, a video was played for the panel where Mr. Gettler stated himself that he was indeed kicked by Officer Evans. In addition to stating he was kicked, his father had also stated that his son had told him he was kicked by an officer when he was arrested. This was all presented for the department at the BOR hearing, and they still found me guilty and terminated me." End quote. Dorner claimed that Officer Evans had close personal ties with higher-ups and department heads within the LAPD, and there was a clear bias and witch hunt taking place against him. During the hearing for his potential reinstatement, the department argued against him, with him writing again within his manifesto, and I quote, "During the BOR, the department attempted to label me unsuccessfully as a bully. They stated that I had bullied a recruit in the academy when in reality an unfounded disposition from the official 1.28 formal complaint investigation found that I was the only one who stood up for them when other recruits sang Nazi Hitler Youth songs about burning Jewish ghettos in World War II Germany, where his father was a survivor of a concentration camp. How fucking dare you attempt to label me such a nasty and vile word? I ask all earnest journalists investigating this story, ask Officer Name Redacted about the incident when Officer Name Redacted began singing a Nazi youth song about burning Jewish ghettos." End quote. Dorner, from all accounts, had a strong moral conviction within him, stating that one of his biggest issues he faced in his life and career was that of blatant racism and discrimination, stating that throughout his life he felt the way people looked at him differently and treated him differently, writing, and I quote, "Journalist, I want you to investigate every location I resided in growing up. Find any incident where I was ever accused of being a bully. You won't, because it doesn't exist. It's not in my DNA. It never was. I was the only black kid in each of my elementary school classes from the 1st grade to the 7th grade. In junior high and any instances where I was disciplined for fighting, it was in response to fellow students provoking common childhood schoolyard fights or calling me a nigger or other derogatory racial names. I grew up in neighborhoods where blacks made up less than 1%. My first recollection of racism was in the 1st grade at Norwalk Christian Elementary School in Norwalk, California. A fellow student called me a nigger on the playground. My response was swift and non-lethal. I struck him fast and hard with a punch and a kick. He cried and reported it to a teacher. The teacher then reported it to the principal. The principal swatted the boy for using a derogatory word towards me. He then, for some unknown reason, swatted me for striking the boy in response to him calling me a nigger. He stated, as good Christians, we are to turn the other cheek, as Jesus did. Problem is, I'm not a fucking Christian, and that old book, made of fiction and limited non-fiction called the Bible, never once stated Jesus was called a nigger. How dare you swat me for standing up for my rights and demanding that I be treated as an equal human being? That day I made a life decision that I will not tolerate racial derogatory terms spoken to me. Unfortunately, I was swatted multiple times for the same exact reason up until junior high. Terminating me for telling the truth of a Caucasian officer kicking a mentally ill man is disgusting. Don't ever call me a fucking bully. I want all journalists to utilize every source that you have that specializes in collections for your reports. With the discovery and evidence available to you, you will see the truth. Unfortunately, I will not be alive to see my name cleared. That's what this is about. My name. A man is nothing without his name." End quote. Dorner had claimed the racism he had dealt with and experienced throughout his life was no different when he entered the LAPD, with an incident taking place where he wrote again, and I quote, "A complaint that I had initiated towards 2 fellow recruits and officers will assign patrol footbeat in Hollywood Division. Officers, name redacted, both current LAPD officers, decided that they would voice their personal feelings about the black community. While traveling back to the station in a 12-passenger van, I heard the officer refer to another individual as a nigger. I wasn't sure if I heard correctly, as there were many conversations in the van that was compiled of at least 8 officers, and he was sitting in the very rear, and me in the very front. Even with the multiple conversations and ambient noise, I heard the officer call an individual a nigger again. Now that I had confirmed it, I told him not to use that word again. I explained that it was a well-known, offensive word that should not be used by anyone. He replied, and I quote, "I'll say it whenever I want." Officer, name redacted, a friend of his, also stated that he would say nigger whenever he wanted. At that point, I jumped over my front passenger seat and 2 other officers, where I then placed my hands around officer name redacted's neck and started squeezing. I stated, "Don't fucking say that," and at that point, there was pushing and shoving, and we were separated by several other officers. What I should have done was put a Winchester Ranger XST 9mm 147 grain bullet in his skull and officer name redacted skull. The situation would have been resolved effective immediately. The sad thing about the incident was that when the detective from Internal Affairs investigated the incident, only 1 other officer in the van, other than myself, had statements consistent with what actually had happened. The other 6 officers all stated they heard nothing and saw nothing. Shame on every one of you. Shame on detective, name redacted, for creating a separate 1.28 formal complaint against me in retaliation for initiating and complaining against both officers. Don't retaliate against honest officers for breaking your supposed blue line. The saddest part of this ordeal was that both officers were only given a 22-day suspension and are still LAPD officers to this day. That day, the LAPD stated that it is acceptable for fellow officers to call black officers niggers to their face, and you will just receive a slap on the wrist. Even sadder is that during the 22-day suspension, both officers received paid leave while they were suspended. When I took a 2-day suspension for accidental discharge in training, I took my suspension and never applied for a league salary. It's called integrity." End quote. After Dorner's firing from the LAPD, he resumed his work for the Navy, and at the time, Dorner had one of the highest security clearances possible within the United States Naval Forces. He planned to leave the past of his time with the LAPD behind him and move on with his career. This is where an incident occurred that would be the final straw before Dorner would go on his vengeance-fueled rampage. On February 1st of 2013, Christopher Dorner was honorably discharged from the Navy. Speculation surrounding the discharge was that the LAPD upper staff had contacted Dorner's employer within the United States Navy and voiced their concerns and opinions after his termination with the department. He wrote, and I quote, "They cost me my naval career. I had a TS-SCI clearance, top secret sensitive compartmentalized information clearance, up until shortly after my termination with the LAPD. This is the highest clearance a service member can obtain other than Yankee White TS-SCI, which is only granted for those working with and around the President and Vice President of the United States. I lost my position as a commanding officer of a Naval Security Forces Reserve Unit at Naval Station Fallon because of the LAPD. I've lost a relationship with my mother and my sister because of the LAPD. I've lost my relationship with close friends because of the LAPD. In essence, I've lost everything because the LAPD took my name and I knew I was innocent. Your day has come." End quote. Now, not only had Dorner lost his future and potential career with the LAPD. He had now been stripped of his reputation and esteemed career he had had within the Navy. During the days before and leading up to his discharge within the Navy, Dorner had decided that there could only be one solution to his problems. He would wage an all-out war against the LAPD and all others he had deemed responsible for the destruction of his name. This is where this dark saga truly begins. On February 1st of 2013, Anderson Cooper of CNN received a package at his office containing a DVD that stated Dorner's case against the LAPD. The package had also contained a bullet-riddled challenge coin issued by LAPD Chief William Bratton and a note inscribed on it with the term 1 MOA, which stands for 1 minute of angle, implying that the coin was shot at a distance of 100 yards and at a grouping of 1 inch, essentially boasting of his accuracy and skill with the rifle to the media. On February 3rd, in Irvine, California, during the evening hours, 28-year-old Monica Kwan and her fiancé, 27-year-old Keith Lawrence, were shot dead in Mr. Lawrence's parked white Kia Optima outside their condominium complex atop a parking garage. Kwan was a women's basketball assistant coach at Cal State Fullerton University and was a daughter of Randall Kwan, the former LAPD captain who had represented Dorner at his 2008 dismissal hearing. Her fiancé, Keith Lawrence, was a campus public safety officer for the University of Southern California, and the couple had pulled onto the rooftop during the final minutes of that year's Super Bowl. The entry gate recorded their arrival to their complex at about 7:30 p.m., but police would not learn about the shootings up until around 9 p.m. when a resident who was walking to his car would notice a body slumped over the steering wheel in the Kia. Investigators pondered how 14 shots could go unheard by the entire apartment complex. Detectives would have to wait for ballistics tests to be sure, but they began to suspect that the killer had used a silencer in the attack on the couple. A silencer was an expensive and rare piece of equipment to be used in civilian crime. The possibility carried with it a sense of dread. Who were they really dealing with? With the scene resembling more the work of a professional hitman or of the mob, they had no idea at the time or leads as to who could be responsible. Investigators asked Randall Kwan, the victim's father, who might want to hurt his daughter. Randall Kwan had been the first Chinese-American captain in the history of the LAPD, and in recent years had worked as a lawyer representing cops that were facing termination. They asked him, did he know of someone that hated him enough to do this? Someone he had busted in his past? A disgruntled client, maybe? Kwan struggled. He couldn't think of anyone who would do such a thing. A frightening detail of the Monica Kwan tale involved an investigator visiting her job at Cal State Fullerton University and ended up finding a compelling clue that someone had been stalking Monica Kwan in the days leading up to her attack. A few days earlier, a man had called the athletic department from a blocked number. He said his daughter played for the women's basketball team, but he was unable to reach her because her cell phone was not working. He asked for the name of the hotel the team was using during its trip to San Luis Obispo. The request was refused to the man, and when asked if he would care to give a callback number, the man immediately hung up the phone, which at the time was odd to the person on the other end, but not too strange. But after what had happened to Monica and her fiancé a couple days after the incident, it was now believed by investigators that Dorner was the caller and that he was looking to track his victim. On February 4th, the morning after the attack on Monica Kwan and her fiancé, In National City, California, about 100 miles south of Irvine, Pedro Ruelas, 32-year-old worker at Sound Solutions Auto Styling, arrived for his shift at work on that Monday morning. And so, as he did every morning, Ruelas went and emptied the garbage, wheeling one of the gray trash cans to a small graffiti-scrawled garbage bin in the alley behind the lot. As he approached the bin, he noticed what looked like police or military equipment lying atop the heap of trash. Most striking was a steel-plated ballistic vest that had caught his attention. His first thought was that he might be able to sell the gear, but he then concluded that the police would want to know about such an unusual find. He flagged down the first cop he saw. That is when Officer Paul Hernandez arrived to the alley and put on a pair of latex gloves and began to dig through the dumpster. Inside he found one ballistic vest, 2 military-style ammunition cans, each with several hundred bullets, 2 cans of olive-colored spray paint, the kind that SWAT members use to camouflage their helmets and rifles, 1 military surplus gasoline container, 2 motor tubes, 1 black leather police duty belt with thigh holster and expandable baton, 2 AR-15 magazine pouches, 1 dark blue LAPD uniform, size extra large, and finally, 1 police officer's field notebook with a cover bearing 2 handwritten names and serial numbers, Dorner, number 37381, and Evans, number 31050. Officer Hernandez collected all of the items and went back to his station. At 10:16 a.m., he told the dispatcher in National City to call the LAPD to run the names and numbers found on the notebook. The answer came back quickly. There was no Dorner currently on the force, but there was an Evans. In keeping with their pre-work ritual, that Monday morning, Officer Teresa Evans had driven to the beach, drank a leisurely cup of coffee, and sat and read the Los Angeles Times on her iPad. That is when she saw a brief story about the double homicide that had taken place in Irvine the night before, but had paid no real attention or mind to it as she was preparing for her late morning run on the beach when her phone rang. The voice on the other end said, "I'm just calling about some property." It was Officer Paul Hernandez of National City. She listened to the strange account of the discarded items he had found. Officer Hernandez had asked if a theft had taken place from her. She said no. She had not been the victim of a theft and had no clue as to how her name and serial number would be written down on the notebook found inside the dumpster. But when she learned of the other name on the notebook, Dorner, was written next to hers, anxiety gripped her. Evans had stated that after the incident at the DoubleTree Hotel and the subsequent firing of Dorner, that for the next 6 months after, she had carried her service Glock with her everywhere. She wore it to the bathroom, to the grocery store, to her son's soccer games. When she drove home, she said she would circle the block to make sure Dorner wasn't following her or waiting to ambush her. She said sooner or later she had believed he would come and try to find her. Teresa Evans also stated that later on that Monday at work, she overheard a group of cops chattering nearby. The subject was an officer's upcoming disciplinary hearing. The officer needed strong representation, someone had said. An officer exclaimed, "You mean a good lawyer like Randall Quan?" Quan wouldn't be available anytime soon, another cop said. His daughter was just murdered. When Teresa Evans heard this, the hair on the back of her neck stood up. She stated that in that moment she felt vaguely sick. Up until now, she hadn't known that the young woman shot to death in Irvine 2 nights ago in the story she had read on the LA Times had been Randall Quan's daughter. She remembered that Quan had represented Dorner at his Board of Rights hearing, and she knew that Dorner had blamed everyone that was involved for his firing, including his lawyer. Her mind raced. She asked herself, was there a connection to the stash of Dorner's gear in the trash bin and the killing that took place in Irvine? By 11:15 that Monday, Evans was on the phone with Irvine Police Department's watch commander, stating this might be crazy as she began to tell her story. This is where the pieces of the puzzle begin to come in place for law enforcement. Up until then, police had no idea who they were dealing with in the attack of Monica Kwan and her fiancé Keith. Slowly but surely, though, the puzzle pieces begin to fit into place. Dorner's lengthy manifesto would be posted to his Facebook page that same day of February 4th. In it he states he has waged a campaign of war against the LAPD and all of law enforcement. In it he writes of his motives for the shootings and his personal beliefs and feelings. He writes he has no intention of stopping or surrendering, and he also writes down personal anecdotes within his manifesto of his goodbyes, thank yous, and other personal side notes to people.
Base Point Loma.
On February 5th, according to military sources within the Navy, Dorner briefly checked into Naval Base Point Loma in San Diego, California. The reasons unknown, most likely picking up or leaving equipment behind, but would skip the checkout procedures on his way out. Later, in February 6th, Irvine police had now officially named Dorner as the prime suspect in the murders of Monica Kwan and Keith Lawrence, with a statewide manhunt in place, making him wanted by all and any law enforcement agency throughout the state of California. On February 7th, 2 LAPD officers that were driving to a protection detail where they were assigned as security for one of the officers that was in Dorner's manifesto were flagged down by a man named R.L. McDaniel at about 1 a.m. McDaniel had reported seeing a man matching Dorner's description at a gas station earlier in Corona. The officers decided to investigate the report. The 2 officers were following a pickup truck when suddenly the driver of the truck stopped, got out, and turned fire with an assault rifle at them, grazing the head of one of the officers and missing the other. After firing at both officers, the man re-entered the truck and fled the scene. About 20 minutes after the Corona shooting, 2 other officers of the police department in the neighboring city of Riverside were ambushed and shot while stopped in their marked patrol vehicle while in traffic at a red light. One officer, Michael Crane, died shortly after the shooting. The other officer was rushed to a nearby hospital in critical condition for surgery and would survive the attack. Later, about an hour and 25 minutes after the Riverside shooting, at approximately 3 a.m., a man matching Dorner's description was said to have attempted to steal a boat in San Diego, telling the boat's captain that he planned to take it to Mexico, but eventually unsuccessful in his attempt. That same day, a federal criminal complaint was filed against Dorner for allegedly fleeing California to avoid prosecution, crossing over state lines, which now granted permission and involved and included all federal law enforcement agencies in the search and manhunt for Christopher Dorner. In 2 separate incidents in the early morning hours of February 7th, police would open fire on people who turned out to be unrelated to Dorner. Dorner was not present at either of the incidents, most people attributing the shootings to the level of paranoia and fear that officers had of Dorner at the time.
And the one he says police screwed up when they opened fire on the wrong truck, shooting and wounding 2 women delivering newspapers in Torrance, California.
Discipline could be anywhere from extensive retraining up to termination.
He says 8 officers are to blame for firing on the truck that barely matched the description of the one Dorner was spotted in.
They wanted to be the judge, jury, and executioner of Chris Dorner.
Glenn Jonas represents the women whose truck was hit with about 100 bullets, while officers were guarding the home of a fellow officer who they believed was a target of Dorner's.
It's somewhat understandable because this man had taken on the police, taken on their families. He was a murderer.
A dangerous...
At about 5:30 a.m. that morning, at least 7 LAPD officers who were on a protection detail of another LAPD official who was listed in Dorner's manifesto were guarding a residence in the 1900 block of Red Beam Street in Torrance, California, when they all opened fire on the back of a light blue Toyota Tacoma and its 2 occupants inside, Emma Hernandez, age 71, and her daughter, Margie Carzana, age 42. The 2 older women were working and delivering newspapers for the Los Angeles Times. Hernandez was shot in the back, and Carzana received multiple wounds to her hand. Their attorney claimed police had no idea who was in that vehicle when they decided to open fire, and that nothing about his clients or their vehicle had matched the descriptions given of Dorner and his truck. The 2 women stated that they were given no warning prior to being fired upon, and both women were injured but luckily survived. The LAPD started an internal investigation into the shooting, and they found that 102 bullet holes were in the woman's truck. The LAPD declined to confirm the total number of officers involved or how many bullets in total were fired, or if any verbal warnings were given to the women before the shooting. An interesting side note of the shooting on the newswomen was that unregistered bullet casings were found at the scene, implying that officers or additional officers were firing their personal weapons at the truck that they had believed Dorner to be in, demonstrating the seriousness and levels officers would go to in dealing with Dorner. Also, approximately 25 minutes after the incident involving the 2 newspaper women, officers from the Torrance Police Department again opened fire and struck another vehicle. Like the first shooting, the incident involved a vehicle police had claimed resembled the description of Dorner's truck, but was later discovered to be a black Honda Ridgeline driven by David Perdue, a white male who was on his way to go surfing that morning. A Torrance PD cruiser slammed into Perdue's pickup truck in the early morning hours, and officers opened fire without warning. Perdue, who was on his way to the beach, was not hit by any of the bullets, but reportedly suffered injuries as a result of the car impact. With tension so high on that day of February 7th, just hours later, after the shooting and murder of officers, and hours after the false sightings and shooting of civilians, the burning remains of Dorner's actual vehicle, a dark gray 2005 Nissan Titan, were found on a remote fire trail by a local near Big Bear Lake, California, about 80 miles from Los Angeles, in the San Bernardino Mountains. Investigators spread out to search for Dorner and the surrounding area. Local schools were closed, and about 125 officers went from door to door through the small town searching for him. For the next 4 days of February 8th, February 9th, February 10th, and February 11th, through a snowstorm, police and law enforcement agencies across the country scoured all known, visited, and suspected locations that Dorner could possibly be. There were theories that he had successfully made it to Mexico or had left the state. As each day ticked by, the manhunt grew bigger and bigger. On February 10th, police held a press conference and offered a $1 million reward for any information leading to the capture of Dorner. And for the first time, his actions were officially described as a form of domestic terrorism against the United States. With Dorner believed to be hiding somewhere in the backcountry of the San Bernardino Mountains, federal and local authorities canvassed up and down the mountain. Law enforcement considered all possibilities and locations, considering he had extensive survival training with his time in the military.
At the end of the day, they're no closer to finding their man, but at least today, no one was killed or injured because of the manhunt. I'm David Wright for Nightline in Big Bear Lake.
On February 12th, deputies of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department responded to a report of a carjacking of a white Dodge truck at approximately 12:22 p.m. and began looking for the vehicle on the ground and from the air. The truck's driver had not been harmed, but he had explained a man brandishing an assault rifle had forced him from his vehicle and told them he had no issue with him, but was taking his vehicle.
Kind of more like well-trained, business-like almost. He didn't have any crazy eyes or anything like that. He was dressed all in military-style camouflage, ballistic vest on with some pockets in the front. Could have had rifle magazines or smoke bombs or something in them, I couldn't tell.
You said a ballistic vest, you mean like a Kevlar vest?
Yeah, big thick vest. Same kinds I've seen on him in the pictures I've seen, military style. So it was all very calm. He was calm, I was calm. It was clear that he didn't consider me one of his targets. He just needed my vehicle. And he said, get out and start walking and take your dog, and that's what I did. I asked if I could get her leash, and he said no, just start walking.
Fish and wildlife officers were the first to spot the stolen vehicle and recognize Dorner as the driver. Fish and wildlife wardens then chased the suspect, and a small gun battle ensued. Gunfire struck a warden's car. Dorner crashed and ran and was quickly able to carjack another pickup truck. Officers from numerous agencies then chased Dorner to a cabin near Big Bear Lake, where he barricaded himself inside. Dorner then opened fire on 2 San Bernardino Sheriff Department officers, hitting both of them. The officers would be airlifted to Loma Linda University Medical Center, where Detective Jeremiah McKay would be pronounced dead upon arrival. The Sheriff's Department confirmed to the media that Dorner had been barricaded in a cabin in a mountainous rural area outside of Angeles Oaks, and that the building was entirely surrounded by law enforcement. A 3-mile perimeter was established around the cabin, and all residents in the area were told to remain inside with the doors locked. Over an hour-long shootout between police and Dorner took place, with hundreds of rounds being fired back and forth. Police initially attempted to force Dorner out of the cabin by using tear gas and demanding him to surrender over loudspeakers. When Dorner did not respond, police used a demolition vehicle to knock down most of the walls of the building. They then shot a pyrotechnic tear gas canister nicknamed a burner into the cabin, which resulted in the cabin catching fire. Shortly thereafter, a single gunshot was claimed to be heard from inside the cabin. As the fire continued to burn the structure, rounds of ammunition were heard exploding from within the cabin, making it dangerous for officials to attempt to put out the fire. Law enforcement had faced harsh criticism for how they had handled and approved their use of the so-called burner, Examiners differ on whether it was justified to use the pyrotechnic devices to end the standoff instead of waiting for Dorner to come out on his own. Much speculation and criticism from the public continues to this day as for the use of law enforcement essentially burning out Dorner in a hope that he'd come out of the cabin and surrender by lighting the building on fire. Reminiscent of the standoff that occurred back in 1993 in Waco, Texas, with the subsequent siege and shootout that federal law enforcement had with the Branch Davidians. Back then, the ATF faced heavy criticism for the use of quote-unquote tear gas canisters that lit the Mount Carmel Center, which the Branch Davidians were barricaded within, on fire and burned it to the ground, resulting in the death of 86 men, women, and children. The tactic for burning a suspect out of a building is not a standard procedure or protocol in any way. The belief is that the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department deputies were at such a stressful and critical moment in dealing with Dorner that they had saw no other option. With officers clearly being heard over official police radio channels yelling, and I quote, "Burn that motherfucker down," multiple times.
Officials were trying to move Carter out of the area into a safer area. We do know that authorities were searching for a man in a Dodge pickup truck. Police officers understand.
The official narrative was that the term burn that we heard over the radio channels was referring to the tear gas canisters that were deployed, stating that they were known and nicknamed within the department as burners, dispelling the idea that police had intentionally lit the building on fire. The police stayed back as the building burned through the afternoon and into the night. The next morning, on February 13th, it was reported that human remains had been found in the ruins of the cabin. A wallet with a California driver's license with the name Christopher Dorner was also stated to have been found within the rubble. It was also revealed that Dorner had been right under law enforcement's nose during the week-long manhunt, with him hiding in an abandoned cabin for the couple of days after his burnt-out truck was found on the fire trail. He was only blocks away from where the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department were holding their nationwide broadcasted media press conference. With hundreds of law enforcement on the mountain at the time, it was a shock to many that Dorner was so close to them all along. It was even revealed that during the door-to-door search the police had conducted in the days before, they had knocked on the property where he was hiding in. But with no signs or suspicion, when no one had answered the door, they assumed it was just another empty winter cabin and moved on with their search. On February 14th, medical examiners confirmed during an autopsy using dental records that the charred body found within the burned-out remains of the cabin was that indeed of Christopher Dorner. The following day, the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department announced the autopsy showing that Dorner had died from a single self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Sheriff John McMahon reiterated the claim that deputies had not deliberately set the cabin on fire, and the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department Captain Greg Herbert, who led the assault on the cabin, claimed that the canisters were a last resort during the standoff. He added that the potential for fire was considered, but ultimately dismissed. In the end of this tragic saga, 4 people would lose their lives at the hands of Dorner. Michelle Kwan and her fiancé Keith Lawrence, Riverside PD officer Michael Crane, and San Bernardino Sheriff's Department Jeremiah McKay, along with others who were injured during his attacks. Many online and in the public would argue of Dorner's cowardice, stating that he never got retribution from those he had believed wronged him, but instead took out his anger and rage on innocent victims. People just caught in the crosshairs or simply doing their job. Many claimed that instead of a man with a code and a moral conviction that had just been pushed too far, this was instead the work of a cold-blooded, maniacal killer whose hate had no boundaries. Dorner's 4 victims never abused him, never hurt him, never tarnished his name, but he couldn't see that. He had waged war against all law enforcement, and his victims were just caught in the crosshairs. The tale of Christopher Dorner would captivate many and would create a semi-fandom for the man online, with many people being sympathetic to his story of his plight. Even celebrity and notable figures have mentioned his story.
How come they never talk about Chris Dorner? That's a story about a man who believed he did everything right. Do you know who Chris Dorner is? Well, Chris Dorner, if you remember, was an African-American police officer in the LAPD. He was executing a warrant with his partner, who was a white woman. And white women, I support you, but boy, if y'all don't shut the fuck up. And he told his story. Chris Dorner told his story, how he did everything right when he was in the military and subsequently everything else. This is before any of this shit happened. And then he said, which was the wildest thing, he said, I'm going to wage asymmetrical war on the LA Police Department and their families. What's an ominous thing to say? And he did it.
Causing some, stirring things up a little bit on Twitter of late. Did you feel that people were going to react so strongly to your opinion of Dorner and his whole issue with the LAPD?
Yeah, it was a sensitive thing. It was, you know what I'm saying? It was a real sensitive thing, so I was aware of that, but that was just my reaction.
Majority of people seem to be on your side as well, so were you surprised by that?
Nah, it's a real sensitive thing that a lot of people can relate to. Right. You feel what I'm saying? Like,
while some others will never think anything other than the fact that he's a cold-blooded killer, that he is no hero and deserves no validation, and there was no honor in what he had done. Similar to the current situation that we are seeing play out in the media with the killing of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, who was shot and killed in cold blood by suspected killer Luigi Mangione in a vengeance-fueled murder. Many online currently are sympathetic and even argue to the fact that they agree with his actions, and an entire internet fandom has been born. But on the other hand, again, just like the Dorner case, the fact is that he is a murderer. He had taken someone's life in cold blood. This topic and reasoning of whether Dorner was right or wrong in taking such extreme and brutal actions is still and will most likely always be a heavily debated subject online. Many commentators and pundits voicing their opinions. Ultimately, the tale of Christopher Dorner is one of tragedy, violence, vengeance, and one of failure. Failure between men, a failure between the system, and with lives being lost, a true failure of humanity.